amongst all forms of entertainment, none are stigmatized more than video games. I guess anime is pretty close, but it's pretty much an overdone conversation at this point. But really, the main argument, I think, stems from how the video game industry began and some of the present practices at play. In this video here, we'll be going through the past, present, and then what's really holding back video games from becoming, well, I guess you could say, conversations you could have with your colleagues. So to start, let's look at the past. So, the first series of video games that ever came out were released in the late 20th century, built on simply just providing cheap, fast entertainment for children. Now, when we kind of look at video games in these times, it goes from children up to adults and, anybody under the sun. But back then, game systems were purposely designed to be basic and have video games with simple objectives. The game had to be fun. Now, eventually, as companies realized that money was tied to this and that money could be made in vast amounts, thus began to roll in the incentivization of players through intentionally addictive gameplay loops and increasing challenges, really starting out the entire arcade market, where players could essentially only continue forward in their games at the arcade by coughing up cash. Now, moving to the present, these concepts, while the arcade doesn't exist at length anymore, really cemented this kind of concept of getting money out of players into the current day in the form of live service games, DLC, and microtransactions. Most, if not all, games that come out nowadays, single player, multiplayer, whichever you call it, are always going to have another way to get money out of you. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, but the whole bit here is they're built purposely to get people to come and use them and play them more and more. So, in my thesis here, I really believe that these kinds of practices give video games a one-dimensional view as, simply put, a waste of time and money, while some have even gone as far to call the medium in quote-unquote intellectual heat sink. I heard that from a guru once, and I guess I kind of agree, but kind of hurts low-key. But anyways, the thing is, there are other forms of entertainment aside from video games that do essentially the exact same thing, but they're just a lot more subtle about it, with video games being a direct example that people can point at and point out flaws in everyday conversation. So, we know that the past and the present give us reasons for why video games are currently viewed as black swans, but there are other reasons for why that is, and I think taking a look at other mediums as a comparison is really going to help us understand this better. So, to start, we have TV. TV shows, as we see them, are pretty easy to talk about with your colleagues, especially when everybody has probably seen all the popular shows, i.e. The Office, Stranger Things. They go all over the place with genres, but as we know, with the quality of TV, not every show is made equally as far as budgets, actors, and how long the shows last. But over time, the gamification of different TV shows has happened, starting with the sitcom genre, which is a low-cost endeavor that can run on for multiple seasons, as long as the show continues to receive high ratings from the network. New sitcoms are constantly being greenlit by studios in hopes of creating the next big thing, but I really think that if something as the next big thing does happen, great, but for the most part, all sitcoms that are greenlit and last for more than 2 seasons are simply cash cows to the network that can then be added to another streaming service. But let's go ahead and remove ourselves from sitcoms. You can kind of think of sitcoms as the live service of the genre. We're going to talk about serious TV now. Think of a 10-episode series that appeals to action and drama rather than just creating situational comedy over many seasons. A limited series such as Beef and Squid Game have actually brought in millions of dollars in a way shorter time span than other prolific sitcoms, and there's something to be said about, one, being able to bring in that much money despite the high budgets that these shows usually require. But the question then is, what's the incentive here? Well, in releasing limited seasons for a show, especially with the advent of streaming services, which are essentially softwares as a service, you really care about user engagement and adoption. But when you take a look at it, when one of these shows is released, not only are you finding a way to instantly boost user engagement and increase new user adoption nearly overnight, but you're able to build up a brand as a serious player in the market, meaning you can work with better directors, better actors, and therefore create more impactful shows that are to be taken seriously, and therefore more people to your streaming platform. Apple TV is an example of a studio that almost exclusively focuses on limited series potential in an effort to present themselves as a studio that only makes the best quality shows. This is how it seeks to stand out in the sea of other streaming platforms, whereas Apple TV, most shows on there, if not all, are completely original to the studio. Which is pretty impressive considering that Netflix only started doing original series about 5 years into their entire business model. And I actually don't know if it's 5 years, I did not look that up. But anyways, so the point is that I'm getting at here is that TV, in a sense, in the serious kind of market, is doing the same thing as modern video game market, where serious TV shows that have limited runs can be interpreted as your single-player story-based games. Not all of them are going to be good, but in an effort to be taken more seriously and create a stronger brand, which helps us sell more games in the future, that's the reason why we're creating them. But, when taking a look at kind of drawing parallels here, as I said before, the sitcom is a live service multiplayer game. The series TV is, of course, going to be these single-player focused games. Now, despite the revenue potential for these two areas being different, one of the things you're going to be taking a look at here is that with TV, it is a lot easier to talk about it with other people. And this doesn't just come from the fact that TV shows are TV shows, but in how the mediums work together. The thing is, with TV, you watch it, you ingest it, and a 10-episode run will take you back about 10 hours of your time. Whereas a video game, you have to directly interact with, meaning you're a lot more involved in that process. You can't really watch something on the side with a video game, especially when it's very single-player focused, because you take away from the narrative and the immersion. But video games, by virtue of being a lot more interactive and upwards of 70 to 80 hours of time to be completed, or in the multiplayer sense, taking many hours, people can stigmatize it and say that in the case of TV, I can watch an entire 11 seasons worth of a sitcom in the time that it takes you to finish Final Fantasy VII 100% achievement playthrough. So that argument is kind of fair because it's the intellectual time sink that we kind of talked about earlier, in that the time spent in TV will probably be less than the time spent on just one single video game. So that's kind of just, and we could talk about film and all these different areas, but we're just going to stick with TV. So now we're going to talk about the second part, which is really, we're talking about the most oppressed group in the world. Obviously, this is a joke, but we're talking about gamers. So as we know, as fellow gamers, video games create fun and addictive experiences requiring really nobody else to engage with. You can play a single player game by yourself, by your own choices, and you don't really need anybody else to engage in that kind of space. Obviously, the same can be said for other media, but this is very much something that you have to physically engage in and be present at all times. Now, similar to movies and TV, but different in that gamers have to interact, it's often created a stigma in which, as I said before, time and energy are sunk into a virtual world, meaning that most video games only exist in the virtual space, and for many people, that means they have no value. And based on how much hours are spent, especially for multiplayer games, there's kind of this stigma around gamers spending way too much time in a virtual world and not willing to confront the real problems. When you take a look at board games or a game like chess, there's a certain element of it's physical, tangible, and you're interacting with the real world. Whereas in a video game, none of that can exist. It's all really just on a screen, and that's it. And so when gamers spend all this time playing video games, in a way, it's kind of like they're basically saying we want to shut ourselves off from the real world and not do anything real. And I kind of get this point, but I kind of don't. And I'll use the angle of Dungeons & Dragons. I've never played D&D in my life, and I don't plan to. And it's simply because if I'm going to invest my time into a story or or campaign made by my friends, well, I don't want to do that. I'd rather a studio or some prolific indie guy tell me, okay, this is a story, play through it. And so I'm no stranger to this, and I'm also a victim to trends. It's the only reason why I played Baldur's Gate 3, because it was a trend. And so you can kind of see this area where gamers who don't fall into trends and are always playing the next big thing and doing different areas are going to basically isolate themselves from the rest of the world, who is basically shunning them for not engaging enough with the real space. And also, gamers are kind of gooner bait, man. I mean, you release a slightly attractive female character in a video game, release that video game to PC, you kind of have people who come in and, you know, they do their thing. Like, don't go to modding websites. So, yeah, that's kind of the bit on gamers. But kind of the last piece to say there is, you know, in modern times, video games have really just increasingly evolved to become labors of love and different storytelling devices, insofar as the communities are the main ones defending these kind of games. And so while some gamers are kind of weird and isolated because society kind of tells them that they should be because of the virtue of their hobby, over time, games have kind of been developing to be less about being for kids and being simple cash grabs to more of how can we tell a story differently. And so now we kind of take a look at, you know, the modern state of video games based on that theory. So more now than ever before, we see games that have well-crafted stories, solid gameplay, and experiences that go into giving the genre more respect. A game should be fun, yes, but can it be more than that? Can it be on the same level of respect as TV, film, books, or a different storytelling kind of device? There's a reason why games like Elden Ring and Death Stranding are praised, and it's not because they are the exact same game, but because they prioritize different things and they do them really well. Elden Ring opted for crafting a very lore-heavy world with a story open to interpretation. But beyond that, it was fun to play, it was fun to explore and see new areas, fight new enemies, try new builds. It is really the quintessential FromSoft experience that only got there from years of, you know, reiterations and every new Dark Souls title, Bloodborne 2, all that different stuff. Death Stranding, on the other hand, while still implanted with a heavy lore, had a much more of a focus on creating a rich, narrative-driven story crafted entirely around the world being built up through the narrative and the characters that work in this world, both being regarded as gold standards in the gaming scene. Nowadays, you also see multiplayer games that do the same thing, but in different areas. At the end of the day, a game should be fun, but whenever you're pumping out games that aren't really fun and really just detract from quality, it's hard to take them seriously. Fortnite is a fun game, but for many people, you kind of get tired of the gameplay loop and it becomes a glorified dress-up simulator, but it's really popular. Every kid plays it. Every adult plays it. It's free. It has so many IPs attached to it that by virtue of it just being trending, it can be taken a little more seriously than, say, you go out to the water cooler and say, hey guys, are you excited for Death Stranding 2? What the hell is that? So, what do? We've kind of looked at gamers, we've looked at the genre, and we've looked at the current state of games, and, you know, here's kind of my thing, right? Here's my piece. Video games, being what video games are, were originally created for, you know, to be fun, to entice players in, and through kind of that method, they kind of just became playthings, almost like toys, like playing with toys. And I think because of this stigma that you haven't really matured as a grown man / woman / they them until you've kind of like gotten rid of video games, because that's what kids do. I actually think because of the stigma is why Zuckerberg's whole VR thing never really took off. And obviously he's still going at it, but anytime that anybody saw anything in the virtual space, they got reminded of video games. Why would I spend my time on that? Why would I waste my time on that? So seriously, there's no buy-in here at all for multiple parties. So I think in order to kind of de-gamify and mystify the space to make it more accessible and more acceptable, you kind of have to do three things that you see done in sports and popular media. First, you have to continue to develop great games in not just the single player area, but multiplayer as well. Being able to deliver quality and consistency in the experiences that you give to players over the years will create much more of a trust in the brands and companies releasing games. As the industry has continued to develop, we are starting to see games that are more than $60, $70, $80 with the new Borderlands title. And in order to bring status to these games and justify these price tags, these games need to be good, but on a consistent basis where people will feel good about buying a game for $80 instead of a ticket to go watch the Detroit Pistons for $200 just for them to lose. Second, we need to popularize the talk of all video games in all circles. This is basically just saying that you need to talk about video games more. The anime community did a really good job on this piece because in the anime sense, people talk about it all the time now. It's kind of become mainstream, so we need to do that with games. Don't be afraid. Lastly, for the third piece, we want to take a look at now this is a very emotional kind of piece here, but we as a community and as people engaging in the industry need to recognize the value that comes out of video games as something good. In the early 90s, there was a whole bit about your kids are going to turn into Satan worshipers because they're playing D&D or they're playing different video games. Your kid's going to shoot up a school because he plays Call of Duty, XYZ. And really, the only good thing that you hear a lot about video games that older people will say is, they're great for kids being able to focus and increase hand-eye coordination. But I think we really need to reframe the impact video games truly have on a mental health perspective. From my own personal experiences, but from what you see online, video games create spaces for isolated kind of groups of people to regain confidence in the real world. This is the part where I'm going to say, look up how Dark Souls cured my depression, and you'll see about 400 plus videos about people basically saying, here's how Dark Souls cured my depression. Second, it really creates avenues for people to not just freely express themselves in new worlds, but to be able to creatively express themselves in the creation of new games and gain restitution for their own quirks. And within those two pieces, we kind of get to the last part, which is the community aspect of it all. Now, as toxic as League of Legends is, you could argue that most of its success and what it is only possible because people are so committed to becoming better at the game and loving the game that they become toxic. And through virtue of that, they get it more into the mainstream. They talk about it more. No publicity is bad publicity. And before you know it, some guy calling someone a slur leads to Arcane Season 1, Season 2. And so they really connect people through some common kind of area. And I think for a lot of conversations about video games, we always talk about the negative, but we never really talk about what it can do for people mentally. And I think in that regard, it can have the same impact as stories that cure you or movies that, change your life, like Interstellar or something. Anyways, the video could go on for ages, but we're almost at the 20-minute mark here. And, this discussion is one that has raged for decades now, but I truly think that video games can be both good and bad, but it really is just dependent on the user and their perspective on it. And so I invite you to, kind of take these thoughts into consideration and talk about games more. And, really just go out there, play a good game. If the game isn't good, say it's not good, make the space better, talk to your friends about it, communicate, and create beautiful things. Ooh, okay. Thank you for watching. I love you too. Bye-bye.